Hello and welcome to a stakeholders meeting on the future of ESTMA, organized by CPA Ontario Centre for Public Policy and Innovation in Accounting. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Ross Gallinger, who is a retired executive. Mr. Gallinger is a professional agrologist, over 40 years of experience in the mining industry, with extensive expertise in stakeholder and government relations, corporate social responsibility, health and safety, media relations, and public policy development with mining sector. Mr. Gallinger, welcome to Goodman Business School.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invite.
So my first question to you would be, what made the mining sector uniquely suited to introduce ESTMA?
The mining sector, looking back to, over 10 years ago when the process started on resource revenue transparency, was really looking at more reporting around a variety of things to show that demonstrate basically the economic benefits associated with the mining sector itself. So the thinking was already there. There was some reporting already happening itself, and the sector was really not resistive to that reporting going forward. So pretty much prepared for it when that process started, and by the time the regulations rolled out, they were very much supporting the payments required under the ESTMA program.
So as a follow-up to that response, how much cooperative do you find the industry stakeholders when it comes to these new regulations?
So, I mean, the issue was going to be was the burden.
Yeah.
There were either in the works or things already happening with regards to reporting payments. Nobody wants to have to do two different reports.
Yeah.
They're really looking for having to submit one report that covered a variety of different jurisdictions, because things were happening in the US associated with transparency, in the EU, other venues as well. So it was really for the industry looking at the burden associated with the reporting requirements of it itself. And really for the sector itself, the resistance was around the perception about how much work was it going to be able to do the accounting aspects, to gather the payments, to be able to do that. And we heard a variety of concerns from industry about the burden associated with that. But I think both through the Resource Revenue Transparency Group that I was involved in 10 years ago, as well as where NRCan developed the regulations associated with that, was really listening to industry around trying to minimize that burden as much as possible, but that there was going to be a mandatory transparency process.
So somewhat a related question. So how has the reception been from the companies in the industry over time?
My sense is it's been positive, because again, it's an opportunity to publish those payments. The other aspect too that we could talk about the voluntary methods as well, or the voluntary ones, and the resistance around that was because we're talking about payments to governments. If you're voluntary, you wonder how other countries are going to react to the fact that you're publishing those pieces. But it now becomes mandatory around that part of it. You could say to other governments, I'm sorry, but I have to do this, or there are serious consequences for us. Yeah.
So how do you know which payments are private payments? Maybe that would be an interesting question to ask, right?
Yeah, what a lot of here is a talk around the issue around bribery. There's already legislation associated with bribery payments. Companies have spent a lot of time in the last 10 years really improving the ethics training for employees around this issue on bribery. The companies that I've worked for have not been engaged in bribery payments. It's a slippery slope to get into associated with that, because they never stop if you start, sort of thing. And nobody wants to get involved with being non-compliant with other legislation around foreign corrupt practices, essentially. So, you know, we talk about it not having capturing bribery payments, but it's nothing to do with that from what I see. The interesting part in the conversation that hasn't come out is, so what is government doing with the money that happens? Bribery is actually on the other side of the fence, associated with the government's received the taxation, so now what have they done with it as well? And I think that's where the conversation needs to go to, and this transparency piece really helps in terms of engaging that conversation moving forward.
So you're talking about conversation. So how much discussion do we really have in the industry about bribery payments? Like, is it a well-talked topic, or like people don't really want to address this issue?
No, it's a very topical piece of it. As I said, most companies and companies that I've been involved in do a lot of training around, bribery and corruption, essentially, on that part of it. We have internal processes to capture that early on, and suspicious payments, to see internal audit programs, et cetera, to capture this long before it becomes an issue. Yeah. So, that's really where we've come from, because there have been some cases in the mining sector where there's been some bribery payments, et cetera, and we watch what happens with those companies, which is very bad from a reputational point of view, not only the penalty pieces of it as well, and it really erodes trust with the countries that you're dealing with, or other stakeholders as well. So it's been really a big avoidance to that. The consequences of not paying bribes in many senses just delays.
Yes.
Because the thing with bribes most of the time is accelerating through some processes. So companies need to be more patient. The mining industry has always been patient in terms of getting projects going. Bribery has been less of an issue, I think, especially in the last 10 years than maybe previously.
So let's talk about mandatory disclosure. Why did you recommend the route to mandatory disclosure? Why not let companies be more voluntary?
One thing is that civil society was really looking at mandatory. It means that everybody's going to report, which is what civil society really wanted. So, the leaders and followers have no issue with this, because they were prepared to do it as part of that. It brings the laggards in the industry up in terms of a level playing field associated with that. That's really the crux of that part of it. Again, as I said before, this now allowed us to be able to publish what the taxes are by country, project by project basis. Again, where countries might have been resistive to, and other stakeholders resistant of us publishing what those taxation are, because now the public can say, well, how are you using this money? We can say, because it's required in Canada, there are consequences if we don't do that.
So a quick question around the debate of mandatory and voluntary disclosure. So there are evidences that when you put a mandatory requirement on it, companies might simply check the boxes. Otherwise, maybe in other instances, there are companies which voluntarily disclose a lot more, or would have disclosed a lot more. Now that you have a checklist of mandatory disclosures, maybe they will disclose less. Might this be the case?
Well, you have to think, as in any business, the mining sector is no different, that there are leaders, there are followers, there are laggards, okay? So the laggards are, going to only do it if they're really forced into it. That's the lowest common denominator on that part. It's not going to reduce the leaders or the followers. If there is a good business reason for disclosing a lot more, they will continue to do that part of it on the voluntary side of it. So, there's this voluntary versus mandatory. Mandatory tends to be very small focused, whereas the voluntary tends to be more. And I hear people talk about, well, it's voluntary, you can opt out. Very few companies I know that have entered into a voluntary process have ever opted out.
Yeah.
Okay, and I look at it as you have to think of the same way as if you volunteer your time for a charitable organization. You're in there fully onto that. You're committed to doing that. So a company that enters into a voluntary initiative is doing this because they understand what the work is that it's going to, involved in it, and they're fully committed into doing that. So there's a situation, and when society actually rewards company for doing those voluntary initiatives, now you have the followers deciding to move into that area and maybe bring the laggards in with that as well.
So I will take your last point. Like, do society really value, like I'm talking about the external stakeholders outside the company. We are now mandating it. How much do the external stakeholders really actually value this disclosure?
So there's a variety of disclosure at a variety of levels.
Yes.
Okay. I can tell you that the reporting is stakeholder driven.
Yes.
So at a community level, completely different than at an investor level.
Investor level.
The information that we have in ESTMA has little value on the community level. There is some there, and that's reported. Their interest lies in a variety of other things that don't interest investors per se. Okay, so you have to look at reporting at various levels. There's no one size fits all. Each stakeholder is looking for different information, and they either exert different forces associated to where they come from. So investors are looking at this from kind of a different lens, and what their requirements are completely different than other stakeholders associated with it. So it makes kind of aggregating the data and now really trying to work with each stakeholder is exactly what you want, and I need to go outside of this because there's more information that's required on that regard. But again, the information that's given and demanded by investors would be like talking a different language on a community level.
My last question to you. Why are you so passionate about ESG reporting, and what advice do you have to business students about ESG reporting in the future?
Well, it's all about trying to articulate your environmental and social impact. My criticism with industry and anybody really is we've been unable to articulate our environmental and social impact. I asked you, so what's your environmental impact today? You really have to think about the things that you did, etc. It becomes very complicated. If I ask somebody else that same question, they're going to have a different set of criteria. So that's been a bit of the problem, is that we're kind of looking for this holy grail of,
and it's difficult to measure too, right? Like even if we agree that our footprint is this much, but maybe you will come with some criteria and I might not even agree with it. And
correct.
And there might be totally different results.
Correct. What interests me from an environmental perspective might not interest you from an environmental perspective, right? So that's the challenge that we have, and I think there has been for the last 25 years this tension from a variety of reporting aspects. But I'm very passionate about what was CSR, which is now kind of ESG. I've always looked at how do we do better, how do we improve performance, how do we improve the social benefits associated with the extractive sector. So my passion comes from there. Reporting on transparency is very important. I mean, it's very important, again, looking at the various stakeholders as we see. There's no one size fits all. And I think the problem that I see is we're trying to, externally, people are thinking there's one size fits all. But how do you compare a mine to a bank? you can't. It's
So there is an expectation gap. We think that I will be getting this information from here, but maybe that information is not even.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gallinger. It was really a wonderful experience for us to have you at Goodman, and we really hope that we will get you soon again in the future.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Same.
Thank you very much.